Hello, it's Lawrence Romanosky from Calgary, Canada, and what we have here is the Volvo XC40 Recharge. This is Volvo's first entry into the battery electric vehicle market. This review will be an in-depth review, but I'll start with a short 5-minute introduction summarizing the 2 days I spent with the vehicle, what I think of it, and touching on the performance, practicality, and safety. Later in the video, and I'll mark this with time marks, you can go in it and see a deeper dive into each area should you wish. Okay, so what we have here is a compact SUV. This is I would say the most popular segment in the market today. It's what every manufacturer offers a version of. We have them in combustion engines, hybrids, and pure electrics. It would be probably the most competitive segment for any battery electric vehicle. Most of them are going to be made the same. In other words, if you're making a pure electric vehicle and you're designing it, you'll start with the battery, which is going to be as low down as possible in between the front axles, so that takes up the floor. You could either have a two-wheel drive version with one electric motor in line with the rear or the front axle driving two wheels, or you can have two electric motors, in which case you have all-wheel drive. Okay, so this Volvo comes in a two electric motor all-wheel drive version. We may see a simpler, cheaper XC40 with only rear-wheel drive and one motor, but for now this is the twin motor all-wheel drive. When we do the two motors, we have 300 kilowatts of power. 300 kilowatts of power is about 400 horsepower. Kilowatt is about 0.745 of a horsepower. So we have 300 kilowatts of power, and we have a battery pack that is 75 kilowatt hours. A small EV might have a battery pack of 40 kilowatt hours. The large ones might be 100 kilowatt hours, so this one's in the middle. It's important to realize that the single most important factor when you're looking for an EV in terms of the cost, the weight, and the range is the battery. So bigger isn't necessarily always better if you don't need the range, because if you spend an extra $25,000 and get the biggest battery you can for an EV with the longest range and you don't use it, what you'll be doing is lugging around more battery than you need all the rest of the time, to the detriment of efficiency. So for this Volvo, we've got a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. And in the real world, when we talk about usable power, we're probably going to use about 60% of that, 60 kilowatts of that, because we're not going to fill it up from 90 to 100, because that's a little bit hard on the battery percent. And we're not going to let it get below about 10%, just because we don't want that kind of anxiety. So we're going to be using 60 kilowatt hours of the 75. I've been driving this car for about a couple hundred kilometers. In great conditions. It's a beautiful fall day here in Calgary. It's about 25 degrees, so more or less perfect conditions for an EV. Not too hot, so you have to use all the air conditioning on full blast, and not so cold that you have to heat up the cabin and the interior. I'm getting about 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers of consumption. A little bit less in the city when it's going slower, a little bit more on the highway when I'm going faster, but it's averaging now fairly consistently 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. Now I've got 60 kilowatt hours in the battery pack that's usable. Well, 20 kilowatt hours of consumption going into a 60 kilowatts of usable storage gives me 300 kilometers. So I'm fairly certain that the person who buys one of these cars in real life in the summer is going to get 300 kilometers of range for this car. If that's enough for you, and you don't need to go 400 or 500 kilometers, you'll save yourself a bunch of money, because you can get by with a vehicle with a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. You don't have to pay $100,000 to get a vehicle with a 100 kilowatt hour battery pack. So this could be the right size for most people. I mean, most people put less than 100 kilometers a day on their car anyway. All right, So how does this XC40 compare to others? Well, there's going to be a lot of cars that are going to be similar spec because it's the most popular body style, compact SUV. There's only one place to put the battery in these vehicles, and that's on the floor. They're all going to have two motors, or versions with two motors, and they're all going to have about 300 kilowatts or 400 horsepower. In fact, it probably might even buy the same motors from the same suppliers, okay? And they might buy the same battery pack from the same battery pack, or from the battery supplier. So your skateboard or your basic architecture of the car probably isn't going to change that much, whether you get one of the Volkswagen IDs, one of the Hyundai Ioniq 5 or the eGMP cars, or the Nissan Ariya, or the Ford Mach-E. All those cars are going to be similar in the sense they have similar size battery packs, they have similar size motors, and they have, you know, at least a version that's four-wheel drive, though some might have cheaper versions that are two-wheel drive as well. So how does the Volvo differ from other vehicles in this segment? Well, I think it differs. I think it differs because it's a little bit more practical than some of the other cars, like maybe the Tesla Model 3. It's quite roomy for a compact SUV. I'm 6 feet tall and I fit in it in the front and the back fine. I think that Volvo has a more complete holistic view of safety that not only includes the crash testing, which it's excellent at, but also areas of active safety, avoiding the accident in the first place. And something that's not really talked about is a lack of confusing infotainment options in the interior, which are distracting, which are a cause for a greater and greater portion of the accidents. As I'll go into in the safety portion of the video, the accident rate isn't going down despite safer vehicles, both in the severity of the accidents, in the total number of the accidents, and the accidents per driven kilometer. So all of these bells and whistles and apps and fancy infotainment systems, not to mention texting, is contributing to an increase in the accident rate. So with this car, with Volvo, you've got a fairly conventional cabin, beautifully made, beautifully finished, but without a lot of the bells and whistles and, you know, flashing neon lights and so on that you can get in some of the other cars. All right, so we have a really holistic view to safety. We've got excellent performance. You know, we've got, you know, 400 horsepower, 480 pound-feet of torque. Well, I mean, this car feels as fast as the Bentley Continentals that I used to sell, and it's quieter. So it's amazing that you can get that kind of refinement and performance. That's not necessarily unique to an electric, to this car. It applies to most of the electric cars in the segment. But the Volvo, I think, overall, feels like a high-end piece. It feels like a luxury car. The Royal Oak Volvo, who's the new Volvo dealer in the north, owned by Valentine Volvo. So now we have two Volvo dealerships in the city. It's a beautiful dealership. There's nice people there. Everybody's making an effort to, you know, be dressed stylish and be nice to you, and it feels like a high-end experience. The interior of the car is kind of a cut above other, I would say, other EVs in this segment. And it feels like a quality purchase. It feels like a luxury purchase. I think Volvo, you know, takes the lead on safety with a holistic view. I think that to take the lead on being environmentally conscious. They're, I think, the first manufacturer to say that they're all going to go all electric by 2030. They're taking a really aggressive stance with their supply chain, forcing the suppliers to adopt similar ecologically friendly production methods. They just announced, for instance, a zero carbon steel manufacturing process. So I think in terms of the safety elements of the car, the quality elements of the car, the dealership and buying experience, and the ecological stance, the aggressive stance that Volvo's making, it's a great brand to buy into. It's a decent car. I would say the minuses are that they don't offer a cheaper alternative. This car is about $75,000. I mean, you can get other cars this size with two-wheel drive and one motor for, you know, maybe $60,000, okay? For that matter, you can get the combustion XC40 with similar equipment for about 60 as well. So it's, you're at this point anyway, if you want the XC40, you're going to need to take it with the four-wheel drive and 400 horsepower and 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. And that's not a bad thing. That's the way most people would order the cars anyway. So I think that it's a great entrant. It's an early entrant. I think it stands up well against the VW and the Hyundai when they come out. And I think the ownership experience and the driving experience also, make it a very attractive proposition. So that's the short form. I'll touch on each of these topics in more detail, within this video, and you can see a form of a table of contents, and you can skip to certain points in the video to learn more about each topic. Okay, so let's take a walk around the car, and we can point out some of the details of the XC40 Recharge, and we'll go inside and take a closer look at the interior. Okay, so let's take a look around this car. We'll undo the front hood, and let's see what's underneath there. Catch is over there, and we get this piece of plastic. Okay, so lift that up, and we have a small storage compartment with a tray, and then underneath that, this is what we have for tire repair. So that black box is an air compressor, and then we have some tire sealant. Okay, so we'll put that back. We've got the washer fluid, which goes in there, and not much else. Okay, so let's close this. Let's look at the front of the vehicle here. Apologies for the bugs. We just took it on the highway. So this dish here is going to be the Doppler radar. So that's going to give you the adaptive cruise control, and that is usually a medium to long range radar. Okay, those systems don't generally work in the very short range, and for that you need the camera as well. We have this camera down there, which is the for the 360 degree camera system that takes cameras on the bottom of the mirrors and on the front of the car and the rear, and then stitches them together, and then with some kind of clever graphics gives you a bird's eye view of the car. But we have another camera that's going to live here, and that is going to be the one that together with the Doppler radar, using the radar and the camera and fusing the data, called sensor fusion, it is going to look at the surroundings, at the objects in front of the car, and then determine if you are approaching something too quickly or not, or if there is a pedestrian walking in front of the car. So this is great technology that's only a few years old. We've seen the Doppler radar for maybe 20 years in the high-end German cars, but the take rate was very low. It's actually funny because we had a tough time selling it at Porsche because it's relatively expensive and it was an option. And then a couple years ago, Volvo came out with an ad with two ladies talking in their car, getting distracted, and a kid running out in front of them, and then the car automatically braking to a stop. And that video was widely played, and like literally the switch went on, and then everybody wanted, a car that stopped if a kid ran out in front of the vehicle. So credit Volvo for some good technology, but also some good marketing. And now I think that those systems are prevalent on the majority of cars right now. Okay, so that's how that works. That's not to say they all work, they all are equal. I mean, some systems, it's all dependent on the software and so forth, but the radar coupled with the camera, that really goes a long way to having a reliable system. Okay, we also see that we have washers which pop out and clean the headlamps. Some manufacturers have gone away with that. I mean, first cars had wipers, or the high-end ones did anyway, and then they came out with the washer jets, and then for a while there they stopped putting them in the cars for, I have no idea why. So I'm glad Volvo keeps those, especially in the winter. It's important to keep your headlamps clean. These are LEDs. They're going to be active shining around corners and adjusting focal depth if the car is braking or accelerating and so on. So it's smart technology and LED technology there. And then we've got these familiar medallions that are on the front of the car. Now that is ultrasonic, so that's sonar, and that is for, you know, really close proximity, and those are your that's your parking radar. Okay, so you've got a low speed radar, sorry, a short distance radar, a medium and long distance radar, and then you've got 2 cameras. You've also got cameras on the bottoms of the mirrors right there, and then you can expect to find a camera right, you can see it right there, and we can, of course, we have a power lift gate, and we also have the ability to wave our foot underneath the car and have it raise. Systems can be finicky. I have a friend who joked that, not on a Volvo, but on another car, that he always has trouble getting it to work, but it works first time for his dog every single time. Okay, so we've seen the fuel cap. There's no release for it. This is the button that will release the charger, and then we've got the AC part of the port here, and then this cap unlocks the DC. When you go to a fast charger, you're just using these, although you have what's called the J1772 CCS standard fitment for the charger. Okay, and then that goes like that. Inside the car, we have, you know, nice door cards, nice materials, you know, satin alloy. This one has the Harman Kardon sound system. We have a nice kind of synthetic material. Actually, I bet it's recycled material in this car. So that's, I think, well executed. We have nice seats with leather contrast stitch, Alcantara centers, perforated bolsters, a nice leather steering wheel, small diameter, perforated leather, again, satin aluminum finish. We have these floating air condition dials. I haven't seen that before, and it's really quite nice. Again, it's solid aluminum, so really nice tactile feel. This cabin is a step above, I would say, the norm for this price class. I would say that it's the equal, or maybe even a little bit better than a Porsche Taycan. It's certainly the equal of an Audi. It is I would say far nicer than most of the Asian, Japanese, and South Korean cars. So it's a really quality piece. I mean, you could spend, you know, well over $100,000 and get something that's as nice or even not as nice. Okay, and here is what it looks like when you have a child. This is my 4-year-old in the back, so she's got lots of room. Are you happy there, honey? Are you happy, honey?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you like this car, honey?
Yeah, can we drive in this car?
You want to drive in the car?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll go for a drive. Is there room for mommy too?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Right here.
She can sit there?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe we should go for a ride. Configured like this, we have got the one full-size child seat in the center, and then 2 outboard booster seats. I'll show you that again from the front, or from the other side. And so if you have 2 children that are over 40 pounds, they can sit in a booster seat. Those are just mocked up, but you could have any variation. And then 1 child under 40 pounds gets that. So it is possible for a family like ours. All right, so let's go for a drive. We've got our kids loaded up who are behaving themselves for now, and my wife in the car, and so we're 5 up. Children are 4, 6, and 8. So the doors lock automatically, and we'll pull onto our street here.
Can we go to a stuffy store?
You want to go to a stuffy store? Okay, well, we'll see about that. All right, so, you know, the first thing we notice is it's extremely smooth and quiet. What do you 3 think in the back, huh? What do you think of this car? Anybody? Okay, what do you think about this, kids?
Oh my god! Oh my god!
I like that.
You like that?
Yeah. I want you to do it again.
Yes. Okay, so so the car fits our family. It fits our stuff. It's very quiet, smooth, and powerful. I mean, the kids sure like it when I step on the gas. And very silent. I suppose you have to be careful that the car doesn't make any noise. You have to be careful approaching people on it. But it would be eminently suitable for us, and would do, I think, everything we want it to do. In Calgary, you know, at this time, you know, it wouldn't be our only car, because we do lots of camping, and you know, with kids, you pile everybody in the car and go visit grandparents and so forth, and who are on Vancouver Island, and so we would need something else for long distance travel on the highway. The electric infrastructure in Alberta and or the cars aren't able to provide charge fast enough at this point to make long distance travel viable. But for the vast majority of driving, and I mean, you know, something that's probably, you know, 90% of all the driving that we do, which is doing the school run, doing the groceries, getting the kids to their various, you know, events and dance classes and so on, driving around the city and charging it at home, which we do almost exclusively. The car is absolutely adequate range for us, and I don't believe that we'd suffer any range anxiety. In fact, there's a whole bunch of pluses, because you get preferred spaces at the shopping malls and so forth, and you just integrate charging into your sort of routines, and you get a sense of where you can park and where you can charge and so on. So I really don't think that for city use, that the range of this car, which, you know, is probably a maximum of, you know, between 300 and 350 kilometers. I mean, I don't think that we put more than 100 kilometers a day on it, nor do most people. So in that respect, it's entirely satisfactory. So we'll end this portion of the video, do something with the kids here. Thanks. Start with, we have a smart key, so the car will recognize when the key fob is in proximity, and then we can swipe underneath the bumper, and the trunk opens. Okay, so that's a feature that many cars have now. We've got this parcel shelf cover, and then you just unclip those and take it off if you want to. We have the pass-through for skis, and then we've got a false floor here, which when we open it up and fold, that folds nicely, and then we find some tools and we find the power cord. So this is the J1772 connector. Okay, so that's part of the CCS spec. We have a adapter for this for a 120 volt plug. Now you'll only get about a kilowatt out of that, which is, you know, about 12 amps times 120 volts, so maybe up to 1.5 kilowatts. You want to be really careful though that you don't overheat the circuit, and I'd probably recommend only putting about 10 amps through it. You can set that in the car, the maximum amperage of the AC current it'll accept. So if you're just plugging it into a random socket, 120 volt socket, I'd probably leave it at around 10 amps just to be sure. If that's the case, you're going to be charging it at around 1 kilowatt, which is going to take an awfully long time to fill up the battery. However, overnight it'll put about 10 kilowatts of power in your battery, so you can, you know, top it up at home. Okay, anyway, that's where that lives. There's another section on charging where I'll go through this in more detail. So that's the flat floor, and inside the car, you know, we just Flip that, the headrests fold down automatically, and actually we get a nice flat floor. A lot of cars don't have that. This piece is raised, or you have to pull up the headrests manually and fuss around with them. So this is actually pretty well designed, okay? So let's do it on the other side now. Headrest flips, folds down, and you have a perfectly flat floor. If you wanted to, you can unclip these and then just pop that out. And now you've got actually a pretty reasonable cargo capacity. I mean, that's got to be close to 6 feet long. Okay, so let's just put this over here. And well, why don't we start with a mountain bike? Let's just see how well that fits in here. Give me a second. I'll put a protective cover on the load so as not to get the dealership mad at me. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. Okay, let's fit some more stuff in this Volvo. We have a compact stroller. And there's lots of room for that. Picnic basket. Rocking bunny. "160-centimeter skis." Well, they won't fit like that, but going through the pass-through, there would be lots of room. I'm not at the back of the front seats yet. Okay, so you could fit. Well, you got your rocking bunny, your picnic basket, and your stroller. What more do you need? Okay, so let's get in the car, in the front seat and the back seat, and we'll see how much room there is. I'm 6 feet tall. All right, let's see how this goes. First, let's have a look at the seats. They're done in leather with a contrast light gray stitch, and then we have perforated bolsters on the inner bolsters and leather on the outside, and the interior is Alcantara, which is a synthetic suede. Okay, so that's definitely quality piece. We even have little Swedish flags on the side. All right, so I'm making myself comfortable in the car, and you can see that I'm 6 feet tall. I've got at least an inch of headroom, and then I can drop the seat even further. So that's a lot. I've got, you know, that's a good, what is that? Good 2.5 inches of headroom here. And then I've got ample room in the front. Okay, so now what happens when I go, and I still have, I would say I've got maybe half an inch, a centimeter and a bit. So I'm comfortable, and my knees are kind of right up against the seat, but we've got an indent in the back of the seat, and so I'm comfortable in the front. And so this is about what I've come to expect with compact SUVs. The difference here is I have more headroom. So if I sat in something like a Macan or some of the Japanese compact SUVs, my head would be right up against the top. And I've got definitely enough so that I don't feel it. And then this is with the big sunroof as well, okay? So there's ample room for 4 6-foot adults. So if we're talking about Volvo, safety comes front to mind, and safety, of course, is an integral part of the Volvo DNA. They would have pioneered items like 3-point safety belts, crumple zones for the dispersion of impact forces, etc. In the 50s. Okay, so that's just part of their DNA. I would say Volvo and Mercedes would be the two leaders historically in the safety of the automobile, and both of them have done an excellent job at that, and an excellent job communicating it as well. So under the sort of umbrella topic of automotive safety, I think there's many other important considerations other than how it does in a crash test. Now the Volvos do excellent in crash tests. However, in some of the other areas, they also excel, and others may not do as well because they're prioritizing other things. For instance, the crash testing is passive safety. You know, what happens when something runs into the car or the car runs into something else, and you can break that down into how well the car disperses the energy of the impact through deformable structures. Okay, so that the force of the impact isn't borne by the occupant, but by the rest of the car, which crumples in such a way as the force of the impact is dispersed. Okay, so that's a big one, because no matter how strong your car is, you know, you can't go to a stop from 100 kilometers to 0 in 6 inches, because your body will not take that, and so you need the car to absorb it for you. So that's impact absorption. And then the other major consideration is the integrity of the passenger cell and what may intrude upon it. So making a really strong passenger cell which doesn't deform and keeps the occupants in place, all the while having the rest of the car disintegrate around you and bear the brunt of all of the forces in the accident. Okay, well, that's a very interesting science, materials science, engineering, and so forth. And Volvo excels at that, and the cars get the top rating in the crash testing. But besides the passive safety, there's the whole area of active safety, which is not getting in an accident in the first place. Okay, so under that umbrella, then you have things like, well, you know, can you see out of the car or not? And then you know, you have the electronic systems. Do they warn you when something's you're about to hit something? Do they warn you when you're about to move out of your lane? Do they alert you to a pedestrian? So all the electronic systems, which would then try to get you out of an accident in the first place, and also the I should put my hands on the wheel when I'm explaining this. You've got the passive safety, which is when the car's in an impact. You've got the active safety, which is preventing the car to get in the impact in the first place. Part of the passive safety is all the electronics, which then monitor the road space around you and alert you in some way that something might happen, and then might sort of prime the car for a collision if that's the case. There could be audio alerts, beeping. There could be a visual alert, a big thing on the dash that comes up. There could be haptic feedback, which is in when the steering wheel jiggles or the brake pedal pulses. And then there's also priming all the systems for an evasive maneuver, you know, priming the brakes, etc., to make sure that if in fact an accident is going to occur, at least it'll occur at the slower speed. Okay, so beyond that, there's more subtle things as well, and that would come into the visibility you have, and can you see out of the car, the ability of the car to wipe the glass in when it's raining, and how much of the glass area actually gets cleaned. Where does the dirt from the road go on the car? Does it go, you know, straight in your blind spot, or does it go somewhere else? It would also have, I think, a big important topic is how distracting all the infotainment is in the car. The accident rates have not gone down, despite all these electronics. The injuries have not gone down despite safer cars and more airbags and all these driver aids. Okay, in fact, the rates in a total sense and on a per capita sense or per mile driven sense have gone up. Why have they gone up? They've gone up because of all of the electronics that are in the cars. And so this is people texting when they're driving, but it's also the infotainment systems, which have, of course, everything on them now and are incredibly fiddly and so forth, and distracting. You know, sometimes even, you know, the settings for the driving aids can be distracting and lead to a crash. Sometimes you get lulled into a false sense of security by various driving aids and autonomous driving, thinking the car is going to avoid any accident, except, you know, it doesn't see something and it thinks the sun is a yellow light, and it's not, or you know, it's not very good at driving around semi-trucks that overturn on the highway or something and crashes straight into them, which happens. So where I'm going with this is that the Volvo, it's a pretty straightforward infotainment system, driver interface. It's not overly flashy, it's not overly complicated. There's no TVs, there's no Space Invader game, there's no clever sound effects, there's none of that. It's a pretty straightforward, minimalist interior that would be designed for somebody who's supposed to be paying attention to what they're doing on the road. And so in that sense, coupled with the ability to be able to see out of the car, because it's, you know, an SUV with a lower belt line, more glass area, coupled with the passive safety, makes the whole package in every aspect of vehicular safety excellent for this car. Other cars might do well in a crash test, but they might have a totally confusing driver interface that's really distracting. They might do well in a crash test, you know, but, you know, the stylus sort of took over at the expense of glass area, and it's difficult to see out of it, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're looking and comparing. It's not just the crash test results that matter. Okay, so let's now go and try to fill this car up, charge this car. We've got, I put about 111 kilometers on the car, and we've used 19 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and the charge has gone from about 80 to 60%, and that's about what I would expect, because we have, you know, maybe 60 kilowatt hours of usable battery. A third of that is 20 kilowatt hours. We expect 300 kilometers worth of range. I used up 100 kilometers, so I used up 1/3 of the range. All of that's what I expected. So now let's go charge the car up. We're at a DC fast charger, and we're going to top it up from 60 and try to get it up to about 90%. Let's see how fast it charges at DC, how long it takes. Okay, we see we're at the Petro Canada fast charge, and we are, of course, just outside the city limits, and we have these giant DC chargers. Now, Petro Canada has a network of these from coast to coast, and I think the furthest distance they are apart is about 200 kilometers. So you should be able to drive, in theory anyway, just about any EV across the country by stopping at these Petro Canada stations. And they're the most powerful ones that are existent right now, along with the Electrify Canada stations, which are also 350 kilowatt. They're 800 volts, these are 400 volts, but this car is 400 volts, so you won't charge it any faster at a Electrify Canada station because of the electric architecture in the car. So let's look at this. I have a video on that if you want to look through my channels explaining that in more detail. So we go here, and now there's a various app for this, which I'm not set up for, so I'll figure this out, use my credit card, and then charge this car. At this charging station we have CCS, that's what this car is, which has the AC and DC, it's a combination. And this charge port is the CHAdeMO. That's an older architecture for mostly Japanese cars. I think a Nissan Leaf and maybe the Mitsubishi are the only ones to use CHAdeMO. Everything else that isn't a Tesla is CCS. Tesla has their own proprietary system. There's talk of Tesla opening it up with an adapter to take CCS. Okay, we've plugged it in. We can see that the light is on. You'll notice the cord is really heavy and a little bit cumbersome. It needs to be that heavy because of the power that these units can put out. And with that much power, there's also a lot of heat. So the cord is liquid cooled. So you not only have the thick copper cord, but you have the liquid cooling, which makes the cord quite heavy. Okay. Now this car will, according to the specs, charge at 150 kilowatts. So although the charging station is good for 350, the bottleneck in this car is 150 kilowatts, and that is pretty much sort of top of the class for EVs. Some are down as low as 50, like the Chev Bolt. Others are around 100 kilowatts. So there's not that many that are 150, unless you get to an 800 volt architecture, and there's only a few cars that do that, like the Taycan, and they can go a little bit higher. But this one's 150 kilowatt, which means that we've got a 75 kilowatt hour battery. So in theory, with 150 kilowatts, you could charge the battery in about a half an hour, but it doesn't really work that way because there's chemistry involved, and the charge rate of the battery might peak at 150, but it might not stay there for the whole duration. So I wouldn't expect that you could charge the battery from 0 to 75 kilowatts in a half an hour using a 150 kilowatt station. But let's see what the actual number is. So I just tapped my phone, my iPhone. It read the phone, it initiated it. It pre-charged my credit card, $25, and now it's going to start charging. So now we see we're into it for 10 minutes, 11 minutes now. We started at 59%. Now we just hit 70%. We are only getting 40 kilowatts right now, and they put 8.5 kilowatt hours in the battery. So we were down to 60. We know that we wanted to get back up to 90, which is the maximum that we set in the car. We're not going to try to put the extra 10% in the battery, just for the interest of longevity. So we're going 60 to 90%, and that is about 25 kilowatt hours that we want to put in. And we put in about a third of that, and it's taken us 10 minutes. And so we are looking at about a 30-minute charge time for 25 kilowatt hours to put in the car. Okay, now let's check back. And we've been charging for 24 minutes. It's putting 32 kilowatts in. We've got 17.7 kilowatt hours in the battery pack. And now we're getting to close to full on the battery. So it is normal for the charging rate to start decreasing. Okay, let's head back. We're getting close to 90%. We can see that the power is reducing in between 28 and 29. We've gone for 35 minutes. We've put 23 kilowatt hours in the car, and it's charged me 11.55. Okay, we've stopped. It's taken us 37 minutes. We've put in 23.9 kilowatt hours. Now this is pretty slow. We're only putting in probably an average of maybe 40 kilowatts instead of the 140 that the car would take. I'll try a Electrify Canada station that's also fast charge and see if I can do any better than that. Okay, so here we are at Deerfoot City. This is the other fast charging, super fast charging DC station in Calgary. And this one is just on the number 2 at the edge of the city on 64th Avenue. And Deerfoot City is a large mall complex. Okay, so let's take a look at this Electrify Canada installation. This is of course part of the Electrify America network, and this is owned by the VW Audi group. And they invested several $1 billion as part of the Dieselgate settlement. So this is a result of that, them having to build electric vehicle infrastructure. So let's take a look at what we have here. All right, so we have 4 big chargers, and we see that there are different amounts. So here's the big one. It's the 350 kilowatts. That's not going to work with the Volvo because it has a maximum of 150 kilowatts. So on this side now we've got the 2 CCS, which we need, 150 kilowatts, so that is at the maximum of this car, so they'll work fine. Now we see that we've got the AC circular portion. I need to unplug DC. And this core, I haven't used a Electrify Canada cord yet. It's a little bit stiffer. Wow, I think I need 2 hands for this even. There I go. So that is a pretty massive cord, as you'd expect for something that can deliver up to 350 kilowatts. Although this one's just 150. All right, so it is initializing the charging. And it says it's going to charge me nothing. And I'll gladly continue. Receive my text updates. All right, so we drove about, I would say, 125 kilometers. We last charged at 90%. Now we're down to 56%. We're charging again. And we're at 49 kilowatts. That's about the same charge rate as the Petro Canada station. This is 800 volt architecture. The Volvo is 440 volt. So I wouldn't expect it to be able to take advantage of the 800 volt architecture. Only 800 volt, in theory, 800 volt cars can do that. So I wouldn't expect it to charge any faster than Petro Canada, except it is charging faster. So let's see what happens. We never got above 50 at the Petro Can, and this one's working better. Okay, so we rejoin in about a half an hour. We've put in 24 kilowatt hours so far. We're going to go to 30 kilowatt hours. We're going to get it back up to the 90%. We have a setting in the car that you can set to the maximum charge percentage in the interest of preserving the battery. We can see that we started at 56%. We have a reading here that the charge speed requested by the vehicle is down to 29 kilowatts. I think we saw about up to 65, I think, briefly. And then it mostly settled at around 50 kilowatts. And the charger is then putting out the same number as what the car asks for. So the question that you might have is, if the car is rated for 150 kilowatts DC, in the manual it says 140 kilowatts, and we've been to 2 fast chargers so far today, and the most we've got is 65 kilowatts. What's going on? So the answer to that question is I don't know. If I was to come up with a hypothesis, which may not be worth much, but if I was to guess, I would say that the manufacturers, not just Volvo, but everybody, is throttling back the charge rates of the cars until they see enough data with battery temperatures and ambient temperatures and charge rates and charge times that they know that the health of the battery won't be jeopardized by increased times. And they just might want a bunch more data before they allow faster charge times, which then would be updated over the air. Okay, so we'll get to the last part of the video here, and I'll title this Volvo Math. And what I'm going to do is take my Jiffy marker and whiteboard, and I'm going to write out all of these different units and measures and capacities and consumption figures and so forth that I may have talked about earlier in the video, but I'll put it on paper, and let you take a screenshot of it and maybe save it for future reference. And as well, sometimes, you know, when we're making the transition between talking about liters per 100 kilometers or miles per gallon to electric car measures like kilowatts, it's not a bad thing to just repeat it, because it took me a little while anyway to get familiar with the topics. Okay, so I'll turn this and face the whiteboard here, and let's get started. Okay, so we have, you know, I'll do a very basic drawing of the car. My art skills aren't fantastic. So we're going to have one motor in the front in line with the axle, okay? And we're going to have one motor in the rear in line with the rear axle, okay? So, forgive this. So we've got two motors and four-wheel drive, okay? Now each motor is 150 kilowatts. 150 kilowatts. The total power then is 300 kilowatts. Now, I would encourage you just to think in kilowatts, but if you need to compare, this is roughly equivalent to about 400 horsepower. 0.745 kilowatts equals 1 horsepower. But forget about horsepower. Let's just talk about kilowatts. Okay, so that's the total power of the car. Now, in the center of the car, we have a battery pack made up of a whole bunch of cells, lithium-ion cells, and this battery pack has 78 kilowatt hours in it. Okay, 78 kilowatt hours. So if we take let's just draw a little graph here with the battery where 100% here is here and 0% is here. And this whole battery is 78 kilowatt hours, okay? Kilowatt hours. Well, we're not gonna go below about 10%, and we don't wanna go above 90%. You don't want to go above 90% to preserve the battery, okay? And we don't want to go below 10% because we're not going to take the chance of running out of gas. So we've got in the middle here, we've got about 80% of the battery which we're going to use, okay? And in practice we'll use less than that, but this I would say would be the usable capacity. If we take 78 and we times it by 0.8, we get around 60, I guess a bit more than that, 60 kilowatt hours of usable battery, okay? We're not going to use the top 10%, we're not going to use the bottom, we're going to use it in the middle. We're not going to fill up, we're going to wait till it gets, you know, we're not going to let it go to 0% before we're going to fill up. We'll fill up at 10%, probably, or higher than that, but that's about the range, the practical range that we're going to work with, okay? Now, this car, I've been driving it for a couple hundred kilometers now. This car gets 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, okay? So for every 100 kilometers that we drive it, it's going to use 20 kilowatt hours of power. We have a usable battery capacity of 60 kilowatt hours. 20 into 60 is 3. 3 times 100 is 300. That gives us a range of 300 kilometers, okay? Now, if we use a little bit, you know, we fill up at 0, we're going to get a little bit more range. If we decide we're going to go right to 100%, even though the manual doesn't recommend that when you're charging it, we can get more range. We can push it and probably get 350 kilometers worth of range. But that's just not going to do that in real life. You're going to use 80% of the battery, okay? And the car, it doesn't seem to be that sensitive to consumption. In the city, I was getting a bit less than 20. I never really saw it go over 20. Because it's an SUV, because it's a more of a boxy style, because of that, it's going to have a larger frontal area, it will have more aerodynamic drag than a car, okay? It has 20-inch wheels. They don't have low rolling resistance tires on them. If you push it on the highway and you go 130 or 140, you will see this number go up. You'll be using more kilowatt hours. If you keep it at the speed limit, this is what you'll get. All right, so after driving the car for a couple of days and looking at the consumption, I'm fairly confident that this is what everybody's going to get. All right. Okay, so now let's go through charging. So let's take our battery, which we know the total battery pack is 78 kilowatt hours, but we know that we're only going to use 60 kilowatt hours in practice. Okay, so how do you charge this? Well, if you're going from your home has AC electricity. This is what is in the power grid. This is what's in all the wires. This is what comes into your house. It comes into your house at 240 volts. Depending on the wiring, you can either have a 120 volt circuit or 240 volt circuit. Every house is the same. It used to be 110 and 220, but somewhere in the 1960s it changed to 240 and 120, okay? So each house has its 120 volt circuits and each house has its 240 volt circuits. It's possible to run an EV using 115, but only if you don't drive very far and the car is plugged in, and only if you have an electrician looking at that circuit and make sure that it's not going to be overheated, okay? Most people, or just about everybody's going to put in a 240 volt electrical service. Okay, so it starts off at AC on the grid, and it needs to go into the battery, but the battery only takes DC. DC is the only kind of energy you can store. DC is in every battery, okay? Every battery needs DC. So there are some power electronics in the car that convert the AC to DC, and there's a limitation or bottleneck in the car to determine how fast it can convert the AC to DC. In this car, it's 11 kilowatts, okay? So if you know that the car will only take 11 kilowatts, of AC charge from the house, you can work backward and figure out what is the optimum size of the electrical circuit that you need in order to get the 11 kilowatt. You can get less, you can have a lower powered system, but then you're not optimizing the car's rate of charge. If you get more, it's not going to do you any good anyway, at least now, although sometimes there's an argument for future-proofing it. So the formula that you use is watts equals the amps times the volts, okay? So we know that 11 kilowatts is 11,000 watts equals the amps, and we know the volt is 240, okay? So we know that the amps equals 11,000 divided by 240, and that is about 45 amps. Okay, so we know that to maximize the electrical power going into the car, we can go up to about a 45 amp circuit. Now, what I'd probably recommend is that you would go with you could do either, if you went with a 50 amp service, there is a limitation written into the code that you're only allowed to use 80% of that, okay? So you're only able to draw 0.8 equals 40 amps. So if you put in a 50 amp service, you only use 40 amps of it, and you come pretty close to the maximum of the car, which is 45 amps. If you did a 60 amp service and you times that by 0.8, you get 48 amps, which is a little bit above. So you could do either. Sometimes there is a big price difference between 50 and 60, okay? And also, to put it in perspective, you could probably get away with a 30 amp service. That would be probably the minimum. And if you times that by 0.8, you get 24 amps. Okay, so if you did a 30 amp service, you know, you're quite a bit below the maximum for the car. A 50 amp service might just be the most cost effective, and you could maybe expect to pay a couple $1,000s for that. Okay, so that's the math when you're charging your car from your house and it's AC. Okay, now if you are on the road and you are going to a DC fast charger, okay, the DC fast charger obviously provides electricity in a DC form. You don't need to convert it from AC to DC, so it goes in the car a lot faster. Okay, DC chargers, which are called stage 3 chargers, can be anywhere from 50 to 100 to 150 to 300 kilowatts. Okay, in theory, that's what they say. That doesn't mean you get it, as we've demonstrated with this test. Doesn't mean because the system's rated for 350 kilowatts that you actually get it. So this Volvo Recharge is rated for 150 kilowatts DC. Okay, now the manual says 140, but the internet says 150. Okay, so theoretically you can use 150 kilowatt DC charge and put it in the battery. Now they say it's under perfect conditions and so on, so this is really theoretical. But if you were to put 150 kilowatts into a, well, let's just call it a 75 kilowatt hour battery, well then you would be charging it in half an hour. Okay, that's what that's what all the literature says, and that's when you say you can go from 20 to 80% in so many minutes, etc. That is assuming that you're going to get 150 kilowatts from the DC station. And this test, and the two most powerful stations in the city, we saw briefly a 65, and most of the time it hovered around 50. So at this point in time, we're not getting it either because of the station or because of the car. Don't know exactly why. It could be both. And it could be that because the very early EVs, they want to really keep a close eye on battery temperatures and charge rates and so on, and make sure that the battery isn't getting overtaxed, which might lead to some expensive failures. So it could be that the manufacturer's holding back the DC charge rate in the interest of the longevity of the battery pack and warranty costs. And they say 150 kilowatts in ideal conditions. So I don't know where that is. It's ideal conditions now. It was 27 degrees when I was doing it, and I'd just driven the car for a couple hundred kilometers. So I don't know. Other people do get it, but only for brief periods, okay? So it doesn't matter what electric car it is, it's always the same. Anyway, in theory, you've got let's call it a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. You're going to charge it at 150 kilowatts. That means you're going to charge the battery in a half an hour, okay? If you're only charging at 50 kilowatts, okay, which we were, and we're trying to put it into a 75 kilowatt hour battery, in theory, it's going to take you 2/3 of an hour. Hope my math is right on that. 2/3 of an hour to fill it up. Okay. Also, this car produces about 300 kilowatts. Okay. It has 300 kilowatts, and just for argument's sake, it has a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack. Okay, now you don't drive around and use 300 kilowatts. Like you don't drive around and use 400 horsepower. You only use that under maximum acceleration. But let's say you went to a test track and you pinned it and you did top speed runs, and you were getting these two electric motors to produce every one of the 300 kilowatts. Okay, and let's say that you're going to use the entire battery or at least just about all of it at 75 kilowatt hours. Okay, well, 75 into 300 is 4. So that means that if you're going to use 300 kilowatts of energy and you've only got a 75 kilowatt hour battery pack, that means that you can develop full power for a quarter of an hour or 15 minutes, okay? If you had a 300 kilowatt hour battery pack and you were using 300 kilowatts, well, then you could go for an hour. But because your battery pack's 75 kilowatts and you're using 300 of them, you're only going to go for a quarter of an hour, okay? When we were driving, I was using 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, okay? So let's say that, you know, we're only going to use 60 of the 75 kilowatt hours. I'm using 20 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. I've got a 60 kilowatt hours of usable power. There I'm back at my 300 kilometers of range. So what you can also infer from that is that from just driving down the road, you're only using about 20 kilowatt hours to power the car, okay? Because I'm using 20 kilowatt hours and I'm going 100 kilometers an hour, then I'm driving for 3 hours, okay? So that's interesting too, because we talk about 300 kilowatts of total power, and we're probably using 20 kilowatts just to drive the car, okay? And so when we talk about everything in kilowatts, then it all starts to make sense. The rate which you accept charge is in kilowatts. When the car drives, it expends charge in kilowatts. The consumption is in kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. The battery capacity is in kilowatt hours. So I'll let you kind of digest all of these numbers, and I'll leave it on the screen for you. I think it takes a little bit of time to get your head around this. Once you do, you can start to figure out your own consumption and range, because as long as you know what the usable capacity of the battery is, and you know what consumption the vehicle gets, well, then you can figure out all the rest for yourself, okay? And the posted rates from EPA kind of vary. They're kind of a little bit all over the place. Some cars, like the Tesla, never get the range that the EPA says. Other cars always get more. And there's a tendency for people just to look at those numbers and then decide that, you know, one car is less efficient than the other car, when in the real world, you know, the electric motors aren't that different from one another. The batteries aren't that different from one another. The electronics that govern them aren't that different from one another. And so the actual range, especially at low speeds, when the factors of like aerodynamics, which happen more which affect the car more at high speeds, really doesn't matter that much. So I would encourage people to try to understand that. Also, there's some rates in here that aren't talked about that are pretty important. The ability of the car to accept AC charge from the home, well, that's like 90% of the time you're going to charge the car at home. And so the rate the car can accept AC, in this case 11, that's excellent, okay? There's other cars that are like 3.6, some of the early EVs, okay? So everything else being equal, you know, this car will accept charge almost 3 times as fast, okay? You know, there's lots of other cars at 7 kilowatts, and kind of the sort of the industry standard right now for the new EVs is around 11. There are some cars which can double that to almost 20 kilowatts, but then you need a 100 amp service, and that probably is going to be expensive, okay? So that is a key figure, the rate at which it'll take AC. You really want to pay attention to that. Also, irrespective of the fact that the charging stations only gave us 50 kilowatts on our road test, I expect that's going to change and it's going to go up. And I believe the car is capable of accepting a DC charge at 150 kilowatts. It's designed to do that anyway, okay? But there are other cars that it's not even designed to do that. There are some cars that will only take DC charge at 50 kilowatts, which means that when they get these issues sorted out, you're still stuck there. Okay, so let's say that that you are driving and you're using 20 kilowatts to move your car down the road, and then you're driving for 1 hour, you're going to use 20 kilowatt hours. Okay, so now let's say that you want to put your 20 kilowatt hours in the car and you're charging at 50 kilowatts. Okay. So that's going to take you 20/50ths of 1 hour, which is 40% of 1 hour, which is 0.4 times 60 minutes, which is going to take you 24 minutes, okay? So that would mean that you're going to drive for 1 hour and it's going to take you 24 minutes to replace the charge in that. So this figure here, the amount of DC that the car will accept, in this case, it's a class leading 150. There's a few other cars that'll do more than that, but 150 is pretty competitive right now. If everything works properly, you'll charge a third of the time of that. So if this was at 150 kilowatts, okay, instead of charging the car at 24 minutes, it'd be 1/3 of that, or 8 minutes. So if you drive 100 kilometers, there's a big difference between 24 minutes sitting at the charging station and 8 minutes, okay? So that number is pretty important. So the rate of the car, the rate at which the car will accept AC 11 and DC 150 should be one of the most important things you look for when you're buying an electric car. Okay, so with that, I'll end this long video, and I'm hoping that you found some of this information informative, and I didn't ramble on too much. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe, and this is the start of a series of EV videos that I'm doing. Thanks, bye.